What's the cutest story you know of how a couple got together? A friend of ours was married and found out he had cancer. His wife left him because duck that, I guess. A friend of his with really good insurance suggested they get married just for the benefits for him medically. After a while it just clicked that they actually loved each other very much and they stayed married even after he went into remission and are one of the coolest couples we know. Friends with health benefits, and then they became more. Their relationship wasn't deductible but it happened anyway. Sitting on a train traveling back home from London, I was behind a large group of people who were on their way home from their friend's wedding. One of them asked how the friend met their spouse, and apparently their friend had been on a flight from London to Australia to go traveling for a few months. She didn't have a full itinerary planned, but roughly knew what she was doing. She was traveling alone, but her seatmate struck up a conversation. They had a great time, and found out they'd even studied the same subject at university. They parted ways when they landed in Hong Kong. When they boarded the next flight in Hong Kong, however, they found they were again seated next to each other. Upon landing in Australia, the guy was supposed to go on to New Zealand, but they both decided to ditch their plans, and travel together. They've been together ever since. Air Force Doc told me about how she was in a combat zone and needed air support. The pilot who answered her call and picked her up had a really soothing voice, so she went out of her way to find him again and thank him for his help. They ended up getting married and have a kid together now. Classic I called for air support meet cute. I thought that was when you jizz on them while standing over them on the floor. Cute story my old chemistry teacher told me. She had a boy who was brilliant but never tried and failed the class as a result. Next year he was back and she seated him next to a pretty, very smart girl. You bet he worked his ass off to impress her. They're now married with 2 kids. Could say there was chemistry between them. My mother was an elementary school teacher who assigned a class project to write a letter to people in the military to be delivered randomly. My dad was in the Navy and didn't get much mail, so when extra randomly assigned mail came in, he would sometimes get it. Turns out, my dad got my mom's letter and decided to write back. I hope your dad knew she was a teacher. He did. My uncle joined the military as a Marine, as did my father back during Vietnam. My mom was writing my uncle and in the letter asked if there were any dumb soldiers who wanted to write. Convenient enough, my father was roommates with my uncle and happened to be a dumb soldier. My mother and father began writing letters back and forth for over a year before ever meeting. Once they met, they married a month later. I'm their 8th child. Holy moly, 8th? That's a whole load of family. My grandparents met on New Year's Eve on the subway in New York City. My grandfather was an immigrant from Denmark, and he was seriously considering returning home at the time. My grandmother moved up from the south because she hated it there. My grandfather saw her and thought, I want to go on a date with her. My grandmother saw him and thought, that's the guy I'm going to marry. My grandfather asked for directions to the ferry, he already knew. They wound up talking. My grandfather ditched his relatives to go back to my grandmother's apartment. I don't think anything happened, because her roommate's cooking gave him food poisoning. The next day he convinced her to kiss him for his father's birthday. He hated his father at the time. When he left she got an atlas to try to figure out where he was from. A few weeks later her dad died and she had to go home. She called him to say she wouldn't see him for a little while. He decided that if, after only a few weeks, he was so important to her she had to tell him she was going away, then she was the one. When she came back to NY he proposed. They got married 3 months after meeting. They had 4 children and were happily married for 20 years until she died of cancer. By all accounts they never fought and were in love until she died. My bro. Went through a divorce. Got custody of the kids. Single for 2 years. Did the soccer mom/dad thing. Son was in 5th grade and he went to parent-teachers conference twice to confer with his teacher. School's out, his son has a note from the teacher. It said, if you are interested in a relationship, please meet me at the school near the flagpole at 9 p.m. Creepy, but he went because she was a hot babe. He gets to the school and she is parked by the flagpole in her Jeep. She had gone out and purchased a yellow strobe light to make sure he would find her in an empty parking lot at 9 p.m. in the evening. They have been married for over 25 years. That must have been weird and awesome for the kid. This is the story of how my parents got together and stayed together. My mother has always been very academic from a young age. My father was certainly not academic but a good worker. My dad also came from a difficult background and he and his sister were in foster care since they were young. They were also physically abused by the foster mother they had for 12 years. My parents were friends since they were children and they took each other to the Debs prom. A few months after Debs they started hooking up. One of these hookups resulted in me. My mother was 17 and my father was 16 at the time. She was in her first year in college and was doing very well. My father was after recently being placed in a new foster home with a much nicer guardian. He wasn't going to finish school and had a plan to drop out as soon as he got a job. When they learned my mom was pregnant, it was obviously a bombshell. My mother has been very open with me and her considerations of aborting me before she told my father, as she thought she'd be doing it on her own and on minimum wage. She and my father had a talk and decided they would keep me and decided right there to be in a relationship. They basically already were anyway. My mother completed her first year of college and then gave birth to me. Both my parents still lived separately that summer. My mother decided to keep up college, even though it was 3 hours away. My 17-year-old father took me to live with him and his foster parents. He stayed on in school, as he wanted a backup plan in case his idea for his own landscaping company failed, all while raising a baby. My mother would travel down every weekend to see me. She said those years were the hardest of her life. As I was growing up they presented me with every opportunity they knew of. I was involved in various sports clubs. I played piano since I was 4 and my father even learned basic French and Irish so he could help me with my homework because he never had any help. This is the same guy who hated everything to do with school and still struggles with basic maths. They have since told me they often didn't eat, as all these things cost so much and they were barely stable back then. My mother completed her degree in anthropology and has been in good jobs ever since. My father completed school even though he hated it and immediately went to work as a farmhand, eventually building his own landscaping company from the ground. I am now 20 years old and my parents have given everything for me. I also have 3 younger siblings aged 11, 8 and 5. My parents' new friends are always shocked when they find out about the much older daughter and calculate mine and my parents' ages in their heads. My parents are still madly in love. They have really good jobs and a great social circle. You couldn't meet two people who are more different and yet they somehow make it work. They broke every stereotype possible when it comes to unplanned teenage pregnancy and I couldn't be more proud of them. Have posted this before. It's still a good story. Smile, edited below. In my late teens, I had the typical row with my parents and found a female friend who had just kicked out her boyfriend. She needed a roommate and I needed a place to stay. Nothing going on between us and I slept on the couch. It was the perfect scenario for both of us. She had a Chihuahua. The dog had the run of the place, so much so that she'd leave the front door of the apartment slightly open so he could run in and out. One day, while I was sitting on the floor reading, the dog came tearing into the house, chased by a cat. They both ran into the bedroom, under the bed, out again, around the kitchen, across the living room and back outside again. My roommate and I looked at one another, mouths agape. Over time, it became clear that the dog and cat were friends. They took turns chasing one another. They'd chase, wrestle, eat together from the dog's food bowl, and drink from the same water bowl. Eventually, we met the cat's owner and became friends. The 3 of us would hang out together, dinner, movies, etc. The ladies would tell me about their boyfriend troubles, and I'd tell them about my girlfriends. We were just really good friends. Until I moved out. Cat lady and I started dating. That was almost 30 years ago. We finally got married a few years ago. The long delay is another story. TLDR roommate's dog made friends with a cat. The cat's person and I have been together ever since. Okay, I added the story about the long delay. After we'd been dating for almost a year. I was ready and I thought she was too, so I popped the question. She panicked, cried, and said no. I was bummed, but I knew she had issues about the whole marriage thing, had been forced into marriage earlier by her mother and ended up divorced after less than a year, so I decided to try again later. I did try again later. 3 more times, actually. Time number 2, she said no. Time number 3 she turned me down again. 4th time's the charm, right? Well, she said yes. Then she changed her mind and said no again a week later. It almost destroyed me. We had plenty of time to talk about this and she did a great job of letting me know she wasn't turning me down, just the idea of marriage. She let me know, and I believed her, that she'd still love to be with me, but didn't want to get married. After the 4th time, though, I couldn't do it again. I told her that I'd be there if she ever changed her mind, but she was going to have to ask. A few years ago, 27 years after the last time I asked her, she asked me to marry her. We've been happily unmarried for almost 30 years and happily married for about 3 years now. My dad met my mom's sister at the airport by chance, and he told my aunt he's looking for a wife. He found my aunt attractive, so he was curious if there was more where that came from. My dad did something similar. He just went to my grandmother's house and spent all day with my mom. At the end he asked, "Ma'am, can I marry you, daughter?" She says, "If she wants." She wanted. BTW, my parents are cousins too. Roll Tide. Old retired guy, here. Here's mine. Was a graduate teaching assistant. My office mate left for a class and dropped his checkbook. I had the same class, so I picked it up to give to him. Walked into class. He was on the other side of the room. Me to him, "I have your checkbook." Him to me, "Throw it to me." I threw it to him and it sailed across the room and far away from him. He walked to the back of the room to pick it up. Snarky girl a couple of rows away, "Boy, are you a lousy shot." Me, awkward silence. Couple of weeks later I wanted to go to a concert. The only one I could think of who might be interested was Snarky girl. In a moment of weakness, she said yes. Our 50th anniversary is next year. Time hath not dulled her snarkiness. Does it count if it's mine? One afternoon I got bored and put an ad up on Yahoo Personals. This was 2001. Some guy got bored and responded to it. We got to talking and it turned out that even though we lived in different towns and went to different high schools, we knew some of the same people. In fact, his sister and my friend Patrick dated for a while. What makes this sort of adorable is, at one point Patrick wanted to set me up with him. "You love Carrie's brother. He's so much like you, it's crazy." And I turned down that offer because at the time I did not like blind dates. Carrie's brother, aka the guy I met on Yahoo, and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary in April. In an unrelated twist, both Carrie and Patrick are gay, as it turned out. So the Cubs had just won the World Series for the first time in 108 years and 5 million people swarmed the streets of downtown the day of the parade to celebrate. A little tipsy, I run into a guy in the crowd, literally run into, as in I trip all over him and nearly knock him over. I look up at him and say without thinking, "Say you're hot," and he looks at me and says, "You're beautiful," and before I can process he kisses me. In the middle of the sea of blue sports fans we just start making out like no one's watching. After sobering up a bit, he asks me on a date. I agree. We talk, and it turns out we have a lot in common. We really hit it off. Now, we are just a couple weeks away from our 1-year anniversary. I found my best friend and love of my life that day. The best was when a very cute female student, who had been a piano major, joined the organ performance class I was teaching and fell for the most talented guy in the group. They started playing organ duets by the end of the second semester and married soon after graduation. Everyone in the department liked them and supported their relationship throughout. Organ duets. Skin flutes. My grandparents were set up by their best friends. They put it off for a while because they did not initially want to meet. My grandfather did not like his friend's girlfriend, and my grandmother did not like her friend's boyfriend. They became one of those couples that truly loved each other and saw nothing but good in each other. In the end, their children and their best friend's children became best friends and still talk to this day. I think it's less coincidence and more that the prediction made her look for partnership in people she met that normally she wouldn't have. You'd become far more open to love if you honestly believe that every male you meet has a high probability of being the one. We have a family friend who met each other because they sat next to each other on a 3-hour flight. Exchanged info as they were both arriving in their home city, only to find out they live within 10 minutes of each other. Dated for a few years and got married. Now been married for 20-some years with 2 kids and a seemingly happy life. I know somebody that met his wife rather ordinarily, through friends, and decided to get married after 10 days of dating. Married about 16 years now with 3 kids. Sweetest couple I know. I asked my wife after 5 days. 18 years in December, 1 kid. For a second, I thought you were talking about us. Yeah, well, I asked my wife after 2 days. 2 of my regulars at the gym come in wearing matching outfits for their daily workouts. In the week when her husband was out with the flu, she told me they actually had met in a gym. They spent weeks catching each other's eyes and waving hello before she got fed up and went up to him. She said, "This is ridiculous. I see you every day and don't know your name." And in her words, he took her hand and never let go. They are crazy in love and wait to start their workouts until the other one reaches the gym. Aw, well, I hope they work out together. Ex-boyfriend's parents. His mum was talking to a dude in a chat room and had been for most of that year. She was complaining about some neighbor's stupid dog barking and how it wouldn't shut up. Turns out it was this guy's dog and they lived 2 houses away from each other. No idea if they're together, but we go to a burger van every Friday at work and the owners told us this story the other week. There's a bloke and a woman who were there at the same time almost every week. After a few weeks they ended up talking and a few weeks later saw each other in town. Now whenever they're at the van they're always happily chatting away, so much so the owners of the van take their time making these guys food so they keep chatting. I don't think they've got each other's numbers, but I bloody hope so, because the burgers they do are bloody delicious and that would be a great story about how a couple got together. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.